comes from the Gospel of John. John chapter 21, verses 1 through 14. This is what the word of the Lord says. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, We will go with you. They went out and got to the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, Children, have you no fish? Have you? They answered him, No. He said to them, Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple, whom Jesus loved, said to Peter, It is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, and put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came into the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, Come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, Who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. The word of the Lord. So this story is usually a couple of verses longer, and usually we focus on the last bit when Peter and Jesus have a conversation about Peter saying, Peter, do you love me? Lead my sheep. And most ministers get this text, and that's where they're going to go with it. But this time, those 4 verses have been left off the reading, so we're not going to focus on that today. You know a story is going to be an intriguing one when it involves a ghost and a naked man, right? Well, not really a ghost, but you get the point. However exciting today's lesson might seem on the surface, it actually shines light on a great sadness and a loss of hope. The loss of hope that we experience when we sit in the heartbreak and fog known as grief. How would you describe grief? Grief leaves our bodies feeling utterly exhausted from emotional catharsis. It washes numbness over our minds, leaving us unsure of certainty and hope. It takes over our daily task, creating robotic-like actions that require little actual joy. Simply put, grief overwhelms our physical, grief overwhelms our emotional. Grief overwhelms us. It is this feeling of intense loss. So the disciples are sitting in that right now. The disciples are grieving because not only has their Lord died, which makes little sense to them, but he keeps on appearing and disappearing again and again. And all of this scares them. All of it requires them to act. All of it leaves them feeling a little bit unsure and quite despondent. Jesus has said to them, Go and make disciples. Go, do my work. Go and spread the church. disciples. They knew that Jesus had risen again. They knew that Jesus was alive with them. Their brains were able to comprehend what had happened, but their hearts were still focused on the cross. We sit there sometimes. It's like in that famous Southern movie. Maybe you haven't seen this movie. Steel Magnolias? Oh yeah, okay, good. Well, if you have never heard of Steel Magnolias or heard of the movie, in the South or in the Southern United States, it might as well be a sacred text, right? In the movie, there's this mother, Maylin, and she loses her daughter. She loses her daughter, Shelby, to a heart condition and diabetes. And Shelby is a young mother who leaves behind a beautiful little boy. And Maylin is heartbroken. She's heartbroken because she has lost her only daughter and because her grandchild has lost his mother. And she is struggling with the grief of all of it. And a close friend who probably doesn't know what to say, doesn't have the right words or the answers, but wants to comfort her in some way, says to her, Shelby is in a better place. And Maylin's tears fall, and she says to her friends, that's what my mind says, but I wish someone would explain that to my heart. Sometimes our heart overwhelms us. And when that happens, we do what is comfortable. So Peter reaches that day on that shore for the comfortable. Peter, surrounded by sorrow, seeks comfort from his boat, his net, the calm of the water. He seeks solace from the mundane and the known. He's a fisherman, after all, who likely could fish without much thought or skill, his body acting in repetitive motions that might lead to a warm, hot meal. The gospel writer highlights this lack of hope, or even apathy, by explaining that even though they went out into the boat, even though they spent the night fishing, they caught exactly 0 fish. Their exhaustion and their grief laid bare for all to see. We're not that different from Peter and the other disciples. When the waters of our life begin to get too choppy, we retreat into what we know. We dig into what makes sense, what calms our souls in the midst of the storm. In that case, it might mean eating way too much chocolate. But our comforting spot is different. Your comforting spot might well be in the middle of a boat, in the middle of a walk, surrounded by peace. Others, you may find comfort cleaning windows and kitchen counters until they're immaculate. Some dig in their garden until the earth gives way to beauty and new life. Many get lost in a novel, helping them forget the here and now and instead escape to someone else's reality. When life feels a bit like a hurricane, when we are swallowed up by our circumstances or our grief, we seek comfort by what we know. And it doesn't just mean that someone had to die. One doesn't have to die for us to feel this way. Sometimes we just simply get overwhelmed by life. Often, circumstances that we can't control overwhelm us, and we seek silence somewhere. Have I told you before that I but we're opinionated and southern. So if you're in a room with us and you look around, you'll notice that all the menfolk have scattered. Usually you can find him in the peace of the garage. Matt's up there shaking his head. Because we're a little bit overwhelming. We look for peace when things get a little too busy. We look for peace when things get a little too sad. We look for peace when we can't control things in our lives. And the disciples needed to escape their reality. And this is not new to them or us. But what happens next in this story certainly is new. They, the disciples, get to the shore and empty their nets, only to find that in their haze, they have not caught one fish. Zero. Zilch. None. No fish. Nothing. However, they didn't even get a chance to reflect on their disappointment when a man, whom they failed to recognize, the scripture tells us, tells them to cast their net to the other side of the boat. They obey, and in their amazement, catch an astounding number of fish. Scripture says 153. We don't know the significance of that number, but a lot of fish. And this happens in what seems like minutes. And the disciple whom Jesus loved, but we don't know his name here, immediately recognizes this act of utter astounding abundance and exclaims to the other disciples, "It is the Lord!" And then Peter, recognizing Jesus, gets embarrassed because he's naked and hides to put some clothes on. Now, I have to be honest with you, I don't know why it was important for the writer to tell us that Peter was naked. But I feel like I could write a whole sermon about naked Peter. Peter, who could not hide his true self in the Gospels no matter how hard he tried. But anyhow, a now clothed Peter and the other disciples gather around a risen Jesus and they break bread. Friends, this is a story about how God responds to our grief. This is a story about how God responds to our grief. It's a story about an abundance in the midst of sorrow. It's a story about God showing up when we truly need God the most. Jesus could have chosen not to come to them that day on that rock. Perhaps instead, when he returned to shore, they might have walked away with empty bellies and further shattered hearts. But that's not the story of the risen Christ. A God who promises us that we never have to walk alone on a rocky shore. That all we need to do to feel God's presence is to recognize that God is there. God holds on to us as we sit in solitude and wonder how we could possibly overcome that which makes us sad and heartbroken and leaves us but a shell of ourselves. God's love for us means that God promises us more than we need, an abundance of love. God's love for us means that joy meets us on the edge of discomfort and sorrow. Sometimes it means that we must acknowledge what we have lost in order to be able to recognize who has been waiting in the trenches with us. One of my favorite preachers is a woman by the name of Barbara Brown Taylor. And she writes this: "Life starts in the dark. Whether it is seed in the ground, or a baby in the womb, or Jesus in the tomb, it starts in the dark. And it's true. If you have ever been overwhelmed, scared, blanketed in a web of grief that leaves you feeling hopeless, then you know how hard it is to climb to the top of the mountain from the bottom of a valley. If you have perhaps found your way to church this morning with grief laid bare for all to see, much like Peter, then take comfort, my friends. You are not alone. You are surrounded by saints who care, and you are never abandoned by a God who created and sustains you.